Chapter 1, Police in a Democracy, Part 1. Policing a Free Society. In this first chapter, we have a general introduction to policing, and the focus of the chapter is mainly on discussing some of the difficulties, some of the hurdles that police face when they police in a free society. Now, the United States is considered a republic where we value democratic ideals such as individual freedoms and liberties. And so it could be argued, as we'll discuss in just a few seconds, that policing in such a society is more difficult than policing in a society that is more autocratic, that denies people their rights, that really is set up to protect the interest of the leaders, or whether it's a group of leaders or it's a single dictator. So in an autocracy, the police their main mission is mainly to protect those who are in charge, the government, the state. Whereas in a democracy, we're going to see that it is a much more difficult and complex role, because we value individual liberties, individual freedoms, and so this requires the police to be limited in their powers and to face greater controls. So let's take a look at some of the differences between policing in a democracy and policing in the other extreme, which is an autocracy. First of all, in democracies, such as the United States, we often talk about this notion of ordered liberty. And so what we mean by ordered liberty is we want to have full liberty for our citizens and for individuals. We want them to be free. We want them to be able to do what they want, when they want, how they want, to be able to speak their minds, to be able to act and believe as they choose, to have privacy, to have a bunch of other individual rights. However, because we live in a society with other people, those rights may come into conflict. So my rights, if I'm practicing my rights to the fullest, I might be infringing on your rights. And so therefore, in order to live in a society and not to have chaos, we need to have order. And so you have this notion that the Supreme Court has talked about in the United States quite a few times, this notion of ordered liberty. It's a kind of oxymoron because the terms are in conflict. Liberty implies freedom and order implies control. But what we're essentially saying is we want to give people as much freedom as possible, but there are limits to those freedoms. And so at some point, order will require us to give up some of our freedoms, to place limits on our freedoms. Maybe not give up our freedoms completely, but I'm allowed to give a political speech. The freedom of speech protects me in doing that. But if I'm doing it at 3 a.m. with a sound truck blasting as loud as I can, and I'm waking up all the neighbors, well, I'm infringing on their rights. And so therefore, the government can stop me, can arrest me if necessary, for creating a disturbance. But they're not going, but by saying that doesn't mean we're silencing all political speech. But when political speech infringes on other people's rights, then order may take over and my freedom might be limited. Now, of course, the tough part, and the reason that many of you might be thinking about going to law school, and the reason that we require lawyers and to go to law school, and most judges, if not all judges, have gone to law school, is because we have to debate under the Constitution, where are those limits? Where does freedom of speech end and protection for order begin? And so that's just an example using freedom of speech. But nonetheless, the police are caught up in this. They're going to have to decide, when has a person gone too far? When has a disturbance become a nuisance? Or not a disturbance, a demonstration, I should say, become a nuisance. And so when should we place limits on that person? And so the police are at the heart of enforcing that ordered liberty. But nonetheless, it does contain great respect for liberty, for freedom. In an autocracy, the main purpose is to control. So the order is there, but not the liberty part. So in an autocracy, where we have maybe a dictator in charge, then the police are mainly present to preserve control, to enforce control, to require control. So the main mission of the police is not to serve the public and protect their freedoms, but to protect the leaders, the state, at the sake of the public. So the public is going to be seen as an entity that is to serve the leader, not the other way around. So it's not government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's the people for the government, so to speak. So this is one of the major differences in a democracy. The police have this strong interest in protecting ordered liberty, so respecting the rights of individuals while trying to keep order, whereas in an autocracy, the main purpose is just to keep order. So as I just got done saying, we have great respect in a democracy for individual freedoms, and so that means we're also protecting individuality. And so that means you can be different. You can act how you want. You want to dress a certain way. You want to behave a certain way. You want to think a certain way. Again, as long as you're not illegally infringing on somebody else's rights, you can do that. And so we have great respect for individuality, and the police, as part of government, must respect this individuality. So even though the police officer might be shaking his or her head when they see someone dressed really strangely and acting strangely on the street, as long as that person is not committing a crime, the police officer has to respect it. And that may include someone who is saying negative things to the police and saying negative things about the government. So maybe it's a protest. As long as that protest is peaceful, as long as it's legal, then the police will respect it. In an autocracy, the police are expected to enforce conformity. Everybody should act the same. Everybody should think the same. Everybody should think in favor of the government. They should act in favor of the government. They shouldn't oppose it. So the police are trying to enforce that conformity. They're not respecting individuality. And so think of a book like 1984, where Big Brother is constantly watching. Well, Big Brother is watching because Big Brother doesn't want any thoughts that are against the state, are against Oceania, the government in Big Brother, or in 1984. And so the police, the thought police especially in 1984, are making sure in that novel that people don't have thoughts that go against the dogma, the propaganda of the state. Well, in the U.S., we still allow, obviously, for freedom of speech and individuality. The police are, in a democracy, are mainly focused on protecting individual freedoms and privacy. So in the United States, one of our core freedoms is freedom from government observation. We recognize and protect a certain zone of privacy for each individual. Now, when we cover criminal procedure later in the course, we'll talk about the extent of that privacy, but for now, we have an expectation that in our homes, in our thoughts, we will have a certain degree of privacy. And even when we go out in the streets, we have a certain degree of privacy. And that the police cannot interfere and breach that privacy unless they have a very good and legal reason to do so. In an autocracy, there is no such concern for privacy. Again, Big Brother is everywhere. And so the interest of the police is to protect the state and also to gather intelligence. So a large part of what police in an autocracy do is gather intelligence against the people of the country, of the society, in the society. And so instead of protecting and serving the public, the police are more concerned about protecting and serving the state, the government, and gathering intelligence to try to reveal any kind of dissent within the society, any kind of disagreement against the state. So based on these, we could argue that policing in a democracy is much more difficult because the police have all these conflicting expectations. Keep order, but preserve liberty. And respect individuality, but again, maintain order. solve crimes, but respect privacy. And so the police have this blurred mission that maybe you don't find so much in an autocracy, where it's pretty clear what the police are expected to do: protect the government. As such, policing in a democracy is less efficient. What I mean by less efficient is the police aren't going to be able to catch everybody who's committing a crime. Some crimes are going to go unnoticed. And so in an autocracy, the police may be really thorough. They may be able to catch almost anyone who's committing a crime. If they have cameras installed all over the place, if they have surveillance all over the place, if they're always watching, if there's no respect for privacy. However, in a democracy, in a republic like in the United States that has democratic values, then the police are handcuffed. The police are not going to be able to observe every bit of wrongdoing. And the founding fathers expected this. They set up a government so that detecting crimes wasn't the ultimate priority. Instead, we wanted to protect those liberties of freedom of speech, freedom of privacy. We see that in the Fourth Amendment, where we have protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. So if we really wanted the police to be super efficient, we'd get rid of the Fourth Amendment. We'd say, police, you can go into somebody's house anytime, any place, for any reason, and search it. But we don't value that in the United States. We know that by recognizing the Fourth Amendment and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and requiring the police to get search warrants in many instances, that we are limiting the police in their ability to actually detect crime and to deal with it. And we're comfortable with that. And we say that that's part of the American way. We are going to let some criminals go free because we want to protect these other liberties. And so that makes policing in a democracy more difficult in some sense. Additionally, we expect that the police will be bound by the rule of law. And so what we mean by this is that even the police are not above the law. They must obey it. And even more, we have, furthermore, we have protections in the Constitution that specifically limit the government. And in most instances, when we're talking about law enforcement, specifically restrict the police. And so the police have special restrictions placed on them, even above the public. But we expect the police to also follow all the laws that the public must obey too. And so that's one of our central values in the United States and in other democratic countries, that no one, even the police, is above the law. And so when you read in the book, the textbook, about the rule of law, that's what it's really referring to. In an autocracy, the police are basically above the law. They're a law unto themselves, and they really only have to obey the leader, whoever that may be. We make sure that the police are even further limited by separating powers. So one of the hallmarks of a democratic society is that power is diffused. We don't let the police be judge, jury, and executioner. There's a limit to what the police can do, and then the courts will take over, and then the corrections will take over. So the police are not there to judge the criminals. They're not there to punish the criminals. They're there to detect crimes and apprehend criminals, conduct investigations, and pretty much that's the limit of their job. We diffuse the powers so that no one single institution is all-powerful.